Hi there. In this video I'm going to talk briefly about the appropriate use of quotation, and in particular on how to avoid getting into hot water by confusing quotation with citation, and also how to avoid losing marks by becoming too dependent on quotation in your own composition. Quotation is a way of legitimately incorporating the words from another source into your own composition, and at the same time clearly delineating the work of another author from your own work, and also ensuring that the original author gets the appropriate credit for their words. How you go about quotation depends on what style of referencing your institution has asked you to use. Let's have a look at an example of a quotation in APA style. In the APA style, a short quotation is identified by three elements. The first element is the presence of a citation. The second element is the presence of quotation marks that should encase the quoted material. And the third element is a page reference for that quoted material. Different referencing systems will have different ways of identifying quoted material, but they will all endeavour to make the distinction between the quoted material and the words of the author who is using the quoted material as clear as possible. So when is it appropriate to use quotation? Well, generally speaking, you want to use quotation as sparingly as possible and keep the quotes you do use as short as you possibly can. This is because you get academic credit for what you write about in your own words, not for what you simply reproduce from the work of others. That said, there are occasions when using a quotation is entirely appropriate. These occasions tend to be limited to situations where using the precise wording of another source is really important in terms of preserving the integrity of the point you're trying to make. For example, if you wanted to refer to a widely accepted definition, then it would probably make sense to quote the source of that definition verbatim to avoid reinventing the wheel, as it were. Similarly, using quotation may well be appropriate when preserving the exact wording of the original source is vital to the validity of the point you're making, as might be the case if you were analysing a section of poetry, or referring to a precedent from case law, or maybe even referring to a section from an interview transcript. If you wanted to critique the wording of a particular source, perhaps because it was unclear or factually inaccurate or contained some kind of misinterpretation, then again a quotation may well be appropriate, because if you were to paraphrase that source, then you'd run the risk of critiquing a source for words it didn't actually use. As a student, you're expected to write in your own words whenever possible. But this can be a very challenging thing to do, especially for students that are new to degree level study, or for those that are not particularly experienced or confident in their composition. Indeed, research by Breen and Maassen in 2005 revealed that students often feel frustrated that they're not as eloquent as the authors of their sources, and think that using quotations extensively could be a good solution to this. But this is actually a misuse of quotations that can get you into trouble, or at least cost you significant marks on your work for a number of reasons. First of all, some students get confused about the fundamental difference between citation and quotation, thinking that it's okay to use the text from another source if you cite the author. But of course this is not the case. Citation means you're writing about the work of another author in your own words. If in point of fact what you're doing is taking their words and only citing them, that's plagiarism, because what you should be doing if you use the words from another source is using quotation. If you're a bit unclear about the difference between citation, quotation and referencing, then I'll put a link to a video in the top right hand corner of the screen that you should find really helpful. Another reason it's a good idea to avoid the unnecessary use of quotation is that it's very easy to inadvertently fail to adequately distinguish between your words and those of another author, using the referencing system that's required by your own institution. For example, using the APA style of referencing, quoted content must be encased in quotation marks. But if you were to compose a piece of work fairly quickly, It would be easy to innocently miss out one or more quotation marks and thus fail to adequately differentiate your words from those of the original source. This would still be regarded as plagiarism, as you've effectively misled the audience about the authorship of the text, albeit unintentionally. A final reason to avoid using quotations too extensively is that it deprives you of the opportunity to practice paraphrasing and articulating things in your own words, which inhibits the development of your own voice as an author, and also tends to foster a reliance on using the words of other authors. You should remember that even if you clearly distinguish between your words and those of other authors using the appropriate quotation conventions, if your work is too reliant on quotations from other sources, then it would be regarded as source dependency, which is where your work has derived too much content from other sources for you to receive academic credit, because, well, all you've effectively done is reproduce the work of others as opposed to generating your own work. This is not an academic offence, but it would mean that the source-dependent material received no marks. It's worth remembering that the misuse of quotation can occur via suboptimal note-taking practices. Let's say you find a really useful passage of text and you think, okay, I'll copy and paste that into my notes with a citation, and I'll paraphrase it when I come to use this text in the composition of an essay down the road, let's say. Well, there's a good chance that you won't revisit that material for weeks or even months. And upon revisiting that material, you'll probably note the text and the citation and assume, in the absence of any evidence that those words have been taken from someone else, that you perhaps authored that text and have cited the original author as a nod to acknowledging their work as opposed to their words. Of course, if this text makes it into your eventual composition, then you will have inadvertently plagiarized that author. The best advice when it comes to avoiding overusing quotations is to be mindful of why you're using them in the first place. Avoid using quotations for expediency reasons, for example, to save you the effort of having to write about something. Also, avoid using quotations for the purposes of vanity. This often happens if you feel a bit dejected because you're unable to articulate something as well as the original author. Before you quote something, ask yourself, could I say this in my own words, albeit perhaps less eloquently, without loss of integrity to the point I'm trying to make? If the answer is yes, then you should say it in your own words. Don't forget, you get academic credit for what you show you know and understand via your composition, not simply for reproducing the text of other authors. To avoid inadvertently failing to give another author credit for their words via quotation, ban yourself from copying and pasting content into your notes, because it's all too easy over the passage of time to forget where that text came from and inadvertently misappropriate the words of another author. When you're using a quotation in your composition, double check there and then that you've followed the appropriate quotation conventions to acknowledge the words of that author. It's also a good idea to highlight that quote there and then, so when you're proofreading your work, you know to go back to the highlighted content and double check that you've used the appropriate quotation conventions and have fully acknowledged the words of the source that you've used. I hope you found this video helpful. If so, please do hit the like button. If you haven't already, why not subscribe to my channel for more videos on how psychology can help you study more effectively. If you want to know when I post new content, just turn on the notification bell. Thanks very much.